nations have invested trillions of dollars in and want to continue to protect their investments. We do need, as a globe, to move away from this into a cleaner, greener technology and energy pathway, and at the same time protect the most vulnerable citizens on this planet from the inevitable and unavoidable impacts of climate change. So we're talking about two sets of investments. Firstly, investments being moved from fossil fuel into new, cleaner energy, which in climate change jargon we call mitigation. And secondly, we are also talking about giving money to the poorest people on the planet to deal with the impacts that are not their making, but is the making of the rich, and hence the notion of debt. And that's in the climate change jargon called adaptation. So we're going to need money for mitigation and money for adaptation in the hundreds of billions of dollars.
And yet, for example, the United States has at this moment not pledged anything.
Well, they're beginning to pledge. They are talking about it. In fact, Congress has recently allocated funding for international climate finance, part of it for adaptation funding, so which wasn't the case under the Bush regime. So the Obama regime has actually reversed its antipathy to paying anything, but they haven't paid a lot yet, and they are going to have to up the ante along with other developed countries who are going to have to pay. When you think of the hundreds of billions of dollars that are going to be needed for this, one might think at one level that they're very large, but if you then compare them with the trillions of dollars that were produced out of thin air to pay banks in the recent recession, then saving the planet doesn't seem that expensive anymore. It surely is worth more than saving a few banks.
Tom Goldtooth, can you talk about what seems to be a confusion of numbers that's coming out of the United States, different than for the rest of the world, when it comes to a commitment for reducing the whole issue of carbon emissions, of global gas emissions? What are these numbers? Some talk about 2005, some talk about 1990.
Yes, yes. And I think that the public and civil society really need to zero in on the numbers that are being tossed around, the acceptable number as far as a baseline, a level that we're utilizing within these international negotiations is looking at 1990 levels, okay? So that's why, like within our position, what we call the Red Road platform in Copenhagen, is standing behind the developing countries' position as far as what the emission reduction targets that they're demanding from Annex 1 countries, which is the developing countries, recognizing the Alliance of Small Island States who are asking for 45% reduction level by 2020 at 1990 levels. And we're elevating within our network, standing with the Indigenous Peoples Caucus here, standing behind our indigenous brother, the president of Bolivia, who is demanding 49% reduction by 2020 at 1990 levels. Now you compare that with what one of the climate legislation that's on the table back home in the United States, the Kerry-Boxer legislation. It's using 20% reduction by 2020, but at 2005 levels. So it looks good to the American people, and when you compute that to 1990 levels, it comes out to about 4%. 4% reduction levels. So for those of us that have been engaged, coming from the belly of the beast now, it's very embarrassing to have leadership coming from our country who we stood behind. We stood behind because he represented a lot of the injustices, and he was going to address these injustices with our communities, our Native communities, our people of color communities, poor folks. But to come to this negotiations with the proposal of possibly 4% reduction by 2020, when we need something that's more drastic. The Mother Earth needs something more stringent than 4%. But these are things that we have to really be cognizant of, because it's very important as we're looking at numbers here, is what is the commitment of developed countries to reduce, our dependency on a fossil fuel economy. It's that drastic. So we're bringing not only Western scientists within our delegation who have been trained in the universities, but we also have our own indigenous scientists they come from the land, they come and they're witnessing all these patterns, but also traditional knowledge that can be a solution to the problem.
We have to leave it there, and I want to thank you very much for being with us. Tom Goldtooth, head of the Indigenous Environmental Network, Lidy Nacpil with us from Jubilee South, came from the Philippines, and thank you very much to Saleemul Huq, who is with the International Institute for Environment and Development. That does it for today's show, but we're here for 2 weeks in this global exclusive national broadcast. Special thanks to the whole Democracy Now! Team. Go to our website at democracynow.org for updates. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks for joining us.